Hello, everyone, and welcome to Q&A Corner from High Tech U, a initiative of the University of Victoria's Faculty of Engineering and Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. I am Andrew McLean. I'm so excited to be your host today for another Q&A Corner. It has been a while since we had a Q&A Corner, and I couldn't be happier to start back with these than with our spectacular industry guest for today, Patrick Van Hall, who I'm going to introduce in just a minute. But before we do that, if you are new to the stream, welcome. Super excited to have you here. These are interactive industry interviews. So these are your opportunity to interact with some amazing people from across the world who are doing really interesting things in the technology industry. To do that, there's a couple of ways. So first off, you're here on Twitch. So if you have an account, you can go into the chat down below or over to the left or right, and you can type your questions in there, and I'll make sure that they get posed to Patrick as we sort of go through our Q&A corner today. As well, if you are not feeling comfortable doing that, you can go over to hightechu.ca, our website, which is just down in the bottom corner down there. You can go to the calendar for today. There's a form that you can fill out there, and you can send it via email, and I will get a notification about that, and then I'll make sure that Patrick gets that question as well. So with all of that being said, again, welcome, and I'm going to now turn it over and welcome the real reason that you are all here, which is not to see this random guy who you are already well aware of who I am, but you are here to meet our guest for today, Patrick Van Hall. Patrick, you're up on the screen now. I think you're unmuted, but you might need to unmute yourself. How's it going? Awesome. Same here. I am just double checking. Audio, you are super quiet, so I just need to turn you up because that is not good. We want you to be nice and loud. So let's turn down some other things and turn up some other things. We're going to turn that down. We're going to turn that up. Can you try again? Just sort of say the exact same thing that you just said, and we will see if we've improved our audio at all.
All right. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm looking forward to engaging with the audience, and certainly looking forward to however the conversation goes. I think that it's an exciting time to be talking about technology, to be talking about supply chain, and certainly it's a privilege to be with you today.
All right. Oh, perfect. There we go. So I've got the stream up on another device just to make sure that things are working. So I think we are good. I'm super excited.
Excellent.
So yeah, Patrick, I guess to start things off, I always like to do this in kind of the same way. I'd love if you might kind of, and I know it's in some ways a long journey and maybe a little bit of a windy one, but maybe like how did you end up in the place that you are now, in I guess in terms of your education pathway, and maybe starting really early, is this where you thought you'd be many years ago when you graduated from high school?
I mean, in order for me to be here, I would have had to have known what supply chain meant. And I can tell you that I didn't actually know what supply chain was until I actually stumbled into probably my second or third role in supply chain, where I actually started to hear the terminology a bit more. I was able to, I grew up in an engineering family. My dad was an engineer, my brother, my sister is an economics major. So we were always very numbers oriented. And I was the kid that liked to take things apart, but I could never put it back together. So I was never that one that really had that level of engineering skill. So I more ended up in industrial and operations engineering, which gave me a chance to really think about optimization and how things flow and things of that nature.
You disappeared on me. I love technical
Can you
issues.
still hear me?
Your audio was still going though, so you're good. All right, let's sort that out. I love always having technical difficulties live on a show is the best. The best. All right, let's see if that sorted that out. There we go. Patrick, you are back. That's what I like to see.
Excellent.
I love it. So, so you weren't the person that liked to pull things apart. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so then that feeds into the next really, I guess, important question, which is kind of the title that I put on today's Q&A corner, is what the heck is supply chain and supply chain management? I'll be honest, I am pushing my mid-30s, very close, and I still have no real idea except that everything has a supply chain, and there needs to be a supply chain for me to get my groceries, and that's about it. That's all that I really know. So what is supply chain?
Exactly. I mean, it is the movement of goods around the world. It's everything is a supply chain, at least from my biased perspective. And so when you look at the items on your store shelf, that's part of a supply chain. The medicines that you take when you're sick, the vaccines that are being distributed to combat COVID, all of these are part of a global supply chain. And so everything is connected in a way that isn't evident in many cases. And so that's one of the things that I've been really fortunate to find throughout the course of my career, is just that all of these steps over the course of supply chain eventually lead to what we have in our hands, to what we eat, to what is helping us to live healthy lives. And certainly there's also an element of impacting the planet as well, is that the supply chain is, in some cases, it's also one of the leading causes of pollution just because of the activities that go along with it. But it's also one of the leading groups right now that's trying to spearhead some of these sustainability initiatives, whether it's social or environmental. And so I love to point out, there was a Chipotle commercial that aired back in January. It was originally a Super Bowl commercial, I believe, where there's a boy holding a burrito and says, "Can a burrito change the world?" And he's speaking to somebody in his family, and they kind of had that reaction that they give to kids that ask crazy questions. And then, of course, the commercial goes on to show a farm, and it shows a truck, and it shows the product being delivered to a Chipotle store, and it shows all of those things. And I embarrassed myself even in my own living room when I geeked out and said, "That's a supply chain, that's a supply chain." And my kids looked at me like I was crazy, and my wife just shook her head. But all of that is a supply chain, and there's just so much opportunity to really see beyond just the toilet paper shortage or the ketchup shortage or chip shortages and all of those types of things, but to know how much effort goes into just getting all of those products and services that we experience every single day. That's all supply chain.
I love that. So, but you ended up in a very different kind of side of supply chain. So obviously, certainly I think a lot of people think of like those commodities when they think of supply chain, right? They do think of food and toilet paper and all these other things. But you kind of ended up in a much different side of that in terms of the tech. More, I guess now, obviously, with Kinaxis, and I've got some questions about that later, you're legitimately working on the tech behind supply chain, but you were also involved in supply chain within the tech industry. So I'm curious if you can maybe talk a little bit about that. And then obviously the question I sent you earlier, I'm super curious, like, how did you land the job at Apple? Because I think that's a question that every super tech savvy or kid that's interested in tech is like, how do I get a job at one of those big players? So maybe I guess maybe start on the how did you get into it, and then because I know Apple was later in your career, so maybe go there afterwards.
My first experience in supply chain was actually with another Canadian company, with Celestica, who's a global contract manufacturer, and it was in Fort Collins, Colorado. So it was one of their sites that was there. And I was working in the plant, looking at all the different things that they produced. And so that was really that first exposure. After I completed my undergraduate degree, I was really fortunate to go work for Dell, again, in a manufacturing environment. But it gave me, both those experiences were seeing how the technology gets made. So seeing the flow of goods in the four walls of a factory, so to speak. And really, that was that first initial understanding of it. And Dell at that time was known for really pioneering that just-in-time supply chain. It had a negative cash conversion cycle. So for those of you that don't know what that means, essentially they were able to collect the money from the customers, and that they were able to do that before they paid their own bills because they were so efficient, because it operated so quickly and in such a flexible manner that it was just flying through its supply chain. And what it did is it really gave me a sense for how this comes together from a hands-on perspective. Now, a little bit later in my career, to the next, there was a brief step into some family business, but then I went back into supply chain working for a company named Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto is one of the biggest mining companies in the world, certainly another company with Canadian influence. And what I realized in that role, I was doing global production planning for a site in the Mojave Desert of all places, is that the things I learned at Dell in the high-tech supply chain were transferable to the mining supply chain. And so being able to see the very beginning of a supply chain, literally a product extracted from the earth and then processed and then shipped out. And ultimately, the story I love to tell about going to Apple is that one of the products that we made at Rio Tinto went to Corning. So Corning is a major glass producer. Anybody that's ever heard of Gorilla Glass or Gorilla Glue or those types of products, Corning was really the innovator there. And so that product that we mined and then processed and then shipped to Corning, well, it went into Gorilla Glass, and Gorilla Glass became iPhone screens. And so to be able to connect those dots, that was one of the things that really helped me when I was interviewing at Apple, was just to say that I understand the extent to which they have to know every element of their supply chain. And being able to make those connections between the various experiences. And it wasn't necessarily that I did the exact same thing at every step, but it was about finding those transferable skills, which is something I would recommend for any role, whether you're working in retail or in any kind of starting point, entry point in your career. There are always things that you can learn and you can build upon and make those connections. And ultimately, that really helped me to get into Apple. And then at Apple, certainly lived the supply demand management efforts of iPads primarily, and went through a few different product launches. And also worked for CVS Health on the front store, managing, I forget the exact number of SKUs, but we'll say 13, 14 product categories in a retail pharmacy environment. That other side of the equation is really where I've become a thought leader. And it's kind of a funny title, but that's what I get to do now, is I get to talk about supply chain. Initially, I worked with a small company called SCM World. That company did its job so well, it was purchased by Gartner. And then, so I spent some time as a Gartner analyst as well, and then ultimately made the connection with Kinaxis during those roles. And certainly I'd met our CEO, John Sicard, in, I believe, 2015. And then our chief strategy officer, Ann Robinson, I've met probably about a year later, within the following years. So those connections I made in that role, again, those transferable moments, helped me to really come into the position that I'm in now.
That's a pretty amazing story, to like literally to have been in the supply chain at all stages, certainly within sort of that tech understanding of like literally the things that were used to make that device, but then working and how to get that device is super cool. So kind of jumping, I guess, to that whole supply chain cycle. I mean, at the end of the day, this is just going to be your opportunity to tell stories about supply chain, which I'm super excited about. I mean, listen, it's in the job title, right? So, I guess nowadays, especially for young people that are in their teens right now, and I think you've got kids in their teens.
A little younger, but yeah, coming up on it.
There you go.
That sounds, yeah.
Totally. But I mean, like now, I mean, I certainly came up. I'm young-ish in relative terms, I suppose, but not really anymore. I'm getting to the point where I say that, recognizing it's not true anymore. But looking at the world of people, young people nowadays, if they want something, if they want a backpack, they go onto Amazon, they search on Amazon, they find the backpack, and then 24 hours later, potentially, it's in their hands. And I'm super curious on like what Amazon did to the world of supply chain, in terms of like maybe just in general, but also in terms of expectations of consumers, but also of suppliers, distributors, etc. So yeah, I'm just super curious on like, how did Amazon make your job way harder?
Well, I mean, they're constantly pushing the edge. They're constantly coming up with new things. And that's one of the things that's most remarkable about what Amazon has built is that they continue to invest. And most people don't even know they tried to make a phone at one point, but they consider that failure of that phone launch to be one of the most important innovations that they've had. And so the companies that are leading supply chains right now, Amazon's one, for example, is that they just continue to find new ways because the circumstances are changing all the time. I mean, with COVID and all of these things that are happening, supply chain's always been dealing with these disruptions. And so Amazon basically has said, we're going to keep buying into this experience. From a customer expectation, yeah, all of us are tainted now. All of us expect to be able to find anything we want to the point where we could go down the street 5 minutes away and go pick up that personal care item, or we can just sit on our couch and order it via Amazon. And what's really starting to trickle over is that there's so many of those other companies that don't necessarily even deal with the consumers, with you or I, that we would never know their names. But the expectations that we have as individuals are starting to impact them. And that's creeping into the rest of the supply chain, where instead of shipping things in giant boxes or on pallets, these companies are trying to find how to ship a single item, how to really serve an individual customer, especially when we're looking at 7 billion plus people on the planet. Now companies are trying to figure out how to get to every single person. And that's really one of the things that Amazon has changed is that's the game that supply chains have to be in if they're going to be successful going forward.
I kind of love that. So I want to go back to Amazon, but I mean maybe this applies to just like obviously the online world has changed things. So for example, my wife is a prolific online shopper, and I appreciate it because I get really awesome things. But for example, she ordered something and it came in two packages from two different shippers. So it came from two totally different places. And I realize this is kind of at the end of the supply chain, and there's so much more about how the material gets to the company and how the company turns it in and all the rest of these things. But is that kind of thing of at that final stage of the supply chain being like, hey, it's going to be quicker for us to just ship the things exactly when they're available versus waiting and then shipping them together? Like, is that sort of a result of the kind of changes to supply chain that is occurring because of this sort of globalized world?
I think the experience you've just described is probably atypical. It's not but I would say that you look at, to use Amazon again, they try to push you into a delivery day, for example, and they want you to ship the things all at the same time. So you'd have multiple orders consolidated into one thing. But you even look at things like drop shipping. There are so many products that you don't even realize are made in China or somewhere else, and using a technology interface, whether it's in Canada, the US, or wherever you may be, and they're ordering that single item from China and it's shipped directly from China to your door. And so that you see a number of these platforms, Shopify, for example, I mean, Alibaba, all of these kind of opportunities for individual companies to come up and develop new products are really having that chance to do something new and different because Amazon has changed the game in that respect. But it does absolutely, companies have to know every single point of their supply chain at this point. And you have to be able to say, what are we good at? What can we actually deliver? And then if the worst thing that you can do is tell somebody you're going to ship it 2 days and have it show up in 3. You're better off saying you're going to ship it in 7 and it shows up in 5 because you've set that expectation. So that's one of the things that supply chains have to figure out how to do it. And sometimes it gets wonky because not everything lines up perfectly all the time. And admittedly, there are a lot of supply chain moments where you have a list of orders and a list of supplies, and literally you're taking one, matching it 1-to-1 and shipping it out the door as fast as you can. And so sometimes it goes down to that.
Interesting. So thanks so much, Patrick. I'm just gonna we got some new viewers on the stream, so I'm just gonna kind of throw to them for a second. Welcome if you are here. If it's your first time, welcome to Q&A Corner. My name's Andrew. I'm here with Patrick Van Hall, supply chain storyteller, industry thought leader, currently working at the amazing Ottawa-based company Kinaxis, which we're going to talk about in a little while. If you've got some questions for Patrick about his life working in and alongside the tech industry, about supply chain, anything, please throw it in the chat. We'd love to be able to answer some of your questions during the stream today. We're here for another half hour or so, so please, like I said, throw it in that chat. And yeah, so I guess I'll kind of jump back into a similar conversation that we've been having if you're just jumping on the stream, which is around sort of major players in supply chain. So I think as a consumer now, and I'm saying this from the perspective of I don't know anything about supply chain, but I'm like, I know a little bit about supply chain because I know things ship to me. But that's the end of the supply chain. That's like, it's already produced, it's already there. I guess where and I mean, maybe this is like broad strokes, what are these major stages, but like where do kind of those delineations happen within that supply chain process where there's the need for these systems and these technologies, and sort of adding the caveat of a lot of people that are out there that are teenagers, maybe they've had, I don't know, maybe they're an artist, and I just use that as an example, maybe they make pottery, and so they know, like, they go to the store, they buy some clay, they turn that clay into a thing, they then sell that thing. So their supply chain is pretty short, except they're probably not considering how the clay got to the store. Anyways, so I'm just curious, like, what does that whole process look like from start to finish?
Yeah, I mean, in the example of the pottery, I mean, you're looking at something that's completely custom, more than likely. It's a single piece flow, so you're going out and you are looking to make that one item. And really, the scale is what makes supply chain a necessity, is that you need to be able to replicate that over and over again. And so when you look at a car, for example, and I forget the latest numbers on a car, but 3,000 plus parts, for example, you need to be able to understand where all of those parts will come together, when they'll be available, so that you can actually put it all together. And then, oh yeah, you need to do that across hundreds, if not thousands of cars coming out of that particular plant on a given day. And then multiply that out over the course of all of the variety of manufacturing sites in there. And so when you consider the suppliers, so you may look at a car door, for example, or tires, but then you also have to consider things like bolts, plastic parts, those little clips that hold things together on the inside of the car. And so you have a wide variety of parts. So some of them are big, really important, really expensive things, and some of them are really cheap. And some of them are really important if you don't have them. And there's a great example from Boeing, and this is probably 15 years ago. So another instance of when you realize how old the examples might be, but they couldn't actually launch their 787 Dreamliner because they ran out of bolts. And so when they had their product launch, they had this big spectacle and they were supposed to fly all the media up and show everybody around. But all they had was the plane held together with temporary bolts because they actually ran out of the metal bolts that to hold the plane together. Wow. And it's that type of thing that supply chains need to do. And in some cases, it's not even just your suppliers, it's your supplier's suppliers. And if we look at the need to go back into the mining example, Apple's supplier may be Corning for the glass, but Corning's supplier was Rio Tinto Minerals. And so you have to be able to identify down to that level. And there are companies that are out there that are mapping all the way back to the mines and ensuring that it's conflict-free labor, for example, that it's not child labor, that it's not enslaved labor. And that's part of the conversation as well, is that you have to consider all of those pieces in the supply chain. And that's when data and information and making sure that you're able to look at everything in this concept of end to end, that's really what supply chain is trying to do now. And it's literally from a hole in the ground to a consumer's hand. That's how far it goes. And it's any single product that you touch has been touched by dozens of companies probably before it gets to you, just based upon all the components and all of the movements that occur.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions. I have so many questions. Oh goodness, where to start? Where to start? So, again, I guess I'm throwing. It's funny. Q&A corners always end up kind of, if we don't have a lot of questions, they end up being just me asking really burning questions, and then I try and ask them from a youth perspective. But so Japan, huge when you look at like the idea of project management. So like that concept of Kaizen and like Kanban boards that have become really big. We teach students in High Tech U about how to use Agile, and a lot of those concepts in that world come from there. Where in the world has really been sort of at the leading edge of sort of innovation within this side of things? Is it sort of China and sort of more Asian countries? Is it North America? Are there smaller, or is it somewhere in Europe? Is like Eastern Europe just knocking it out of the park right now on figuring out supply chain stuff?
All of the above. It really is. And there's certain specializations in regions that get more focused than others. But I would say that even things that are manufactured in China, for example, some of those components are manufactured in the US and they're shipped to China, finally assembled in China, and then they're shipped back to the US. So it's all of it is coming together. When you look at China and you look at the skills that they have developed in their labor force, I mean, they start young, they're very structured, they're very disciplined in the way that they produce that. And that's one of the things that has made them a strength in terms of manufacturing. Granted, costs and trade wars and all these things that kids probably don't really want to talk about have changed some of those dynamics. But ultimately, it's hard to say that there's any one place that does any one thing well, because it's so dependent on each other. And it can be glass, it can be screws, it can be display chips, it can be semiconductors. All of those things are coming from different parts of the world, and they're being assembled at one spot, going to who knows where, whatever customer wants them.
Totally. So then maybe that jumps in. And so I know you say like there's certain things like trade wars and that the youth aren't interested in. I think what I've noticed certainly in the generation that we're working with now, and I know you've got, like you said, you got younger kids, but certainly in like the high school level, like us, the UN sustainability goals, sustainable development goals are huge right now. A lot of conversations, particularly in our space of like technology and engagement and making the world a better place. So you talked a little bit about sustainability and that idea, but how does that actually impact your, I guess, your kind of day to day? So you're a thought leader, which means a lot of people are kind of calling you up and saying, Patrick, make our lives easier, make things better. Is sustainability one of those things that people are really focused on, or is it just something that, as sort of someone who's been in the supply chain industry for so many years, that you're just like, this is the legacy that I want to leave behind, is the sustainability?
Top of the list for so many companies right now. It is up there with profitability to some companies out there. And you look at a company like Unilever, London-based but massive global consumer products company. They talk sustainability first and frequently, and that's one of the things that they really are out there at the forefront of. And you talk about sustainable development goals. There's a great infographic on the UN's water page from Unilever talking about the specific things that they're doing to impact that. I think it's the goal number 6, where they're looking to take specific actions within the production of their products to influence that goal. And you see it in all sorts of different products too. I mean, whether it's an industrial product or an auto company or all of the above. And it's really to the point when we talk to our customers and those executives that are trying to get a perspective on it, there's a couple of different elements. One is going back to your suppliers. And as I mentioned before, but a company like Mars Wrigley, Mars Chocolate, they've gone to the extent of trying to limit deforestation of palm trees in Asia for the production of palm oil. Now, what most people, again, don't realize is that palm oil goes into nearly every consumer product in some fashion. But Mars has gone out and said that they want to hold everyone to a higher standard. And so that they've actually reduced the number of suppliers that they're working with to ensure that those suppliers live up to the standards that they're setting, and they're helping them to reach those standards. So it's a partnership opportunity for those bigger companies to help the smaller ones and to be strategic along the way. And then the other thing that's out there that's still growing is this idea of a circular economy and being able to take those products back into a supply chain. And this is really big in tech. When we think about the goods that we buy, the products we buy, and I've got 2 monitors, a MacBook, a couple of iPhones sitting in front of me right now. Now imagine if everybody has that. Imagine when you get your new phone, if you don't trade it in, where does it go? It sits in your drawer. Well, right now, the amount of product that is waste, that is unused, is roughly about 50 times the amount that's being extracted from the earth. And I think that's the number I saw recently. There's so much electronic waste out there that there's this new growing importance of how do we get it out of people's hands and into a reusable format, so that we can take things like copper, we can take things like glass that are recyclable and reusable. There's an element here that is completely environmentally friendly, but it's also economically friendly for the business. Instead of going out and taking it out of the earth again, it's let's go take what we already have and let's find new ways to use it. And it's permeating into product design, it's into all sorts of different elements. And that's a business model, not just a sustainability model.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I did when you think supply chain, you don't necessarily think that, but very early in my career, I worked at a youth center, and there was a company, and again, this was 15 years ago, but there was a company that basically, as a nonprofit, you were able to call them up and they would drop a shipping container at your location, and then community members would drop their electronics, and then that company would cut that nonprofit a big fat check for like a pretty significant amount of money, depending on how heavy the thing was and how much junk there was in it that wasn't recyclable. And then I'm pretty sure they got a tax write-off for that, but then they also got all of the equipment there. And so I kind of love that is sort of that circular economy piece of taking those things and then giving back, while at the same time having a business model that really functions in a super it's like a double whammy. You can get a tax receipt for the folks that collected it, as well as having obviously all of this this great sort of stock supply that you can then turn back into those fundamental building blocks of all those products.
And just to give it scale, when you see initiatives like that and it seems so easy, consider that it's less than 20% of the total electronic waste that's out there is recycled in a given year. So there's still a whole lot of opportunity to go get those products and really do it. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket so far, but companies are really investing in finding ways to go get those products to reuse them.
Do you think that the question is there just because as consumers, and I mean, this is maybe a broader question that falls off of the plate of a youth program, but I mean, certainly we talk to a lot of youth who have phones that are falling apart, right? And I'm sure like we've all seen sort of teenagers that have dropped their phone 6 times and they've got this screen with all these cracks on it, and they won't get rid of it because it costs so much money. And even when that thing breaks, it's like, well, if I need to use that thing. So do you think that there's an economic conversation there, that people just like are feeling like they're not going to get value if they recycle it? Or is it just that, I mean, is there a conversation that you're hearing in the supply chain space about why people aren't recycling their stuff?
Well, what's the incentive? I mean, you have to incentivize people. What's the value proposition for somebody to give it up? And of course, with something as near and dear as a phone, what are you replacing it with, and how much does that cost? That's part of the equation as well. And I worked with a group of supply chain, or a group of high schoolers as part of the SHAD program. I spoke with them earlier this year, and they were talking about things like using recyclable cold containers for grocery deliveries. And I reiterated to them that it's great that the store can use that, but ultimately those need to get returned back to the store so that they can use them again. So how are you going to encourage the customers, once they receive that, to then put it back or take it back to the store or whatever's required. So there is very much a value proposition that goes beyond just simply creating it and putting it into play, but you have to find ways to keep it moving along the process.
Totally. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Okay, so going maybe a little bit of a different direction, because obviously we've got young people that are watching this stream and young people that are going to be watching this stream, and so I always like to sort of front load it with here's cool stuff about this industry. But now, what if somebody has watched the first part of our stream today and they're like, all right, I dig Patrick, seems like he's got a nice house. It seems like this is a gig that like it looks like it does okay. He looks like he's doing all right. I want to get into this gig. What are like some of the, so obviously you came into this through some different places, but if somebody's interested in getting into the world of supply chain management, how do you even start? Like, what do you need to do first? Or I guess maybe if there's not like a specific set of steps, what are the competencies, the skills that folks that are in your kind of line of work really need to be successful?
Well, I would say, as funny as it sounds, a great entry point right now is Uber driver or Uber Eats or Amazon driver or any of those types of things, because that's the hands-on delivery of a product. And so you look at Uber's platform, whether it's for a driver or for Uber Eats, is you have the supply, the food or the vehicle or whatever it is, and then you're matching that to the demand that the individual user is out there. And so when you can move beyond the physical task of it and actually understand that there's a technology platform connecting supply and demand, as the driver, you are actually the supply, and you're helping to make that capacity usable. Those are the types of things that you don't actually think about when you're doing it, but when you can step back and then go talk to somebody and say, I've been doing supply chain, those are really some interesting conversations. And I recently spoke with an individual who managed catering at a big conference center. And he said, I don't know how to talk about supply chain based upon what I've done. And I said, you've had a room full of demanding customers every single night who expect a product to be delivered at a specific time. You can't screw it up. And oh yeah, they have really high expectations because they've probably paid a lot of money for it. That's supply chain, and that's an intense, in the moment supply chain. So all of these things are part of it. And really what those experiences lend are the contextualization of why it matters. I mean, that's the biggest thing that is an opportunity for young people, is to really just think in that broader perspective of why does that one problem that I'm trying to solve matter? How does it help to enhance somebody's life, prolong somebody's life, to really change their experience, whether it's as a consumer or as a human being? It's really, those are the chances that supply chain starts to pull together, and it's all of those are supply chain. And that's what I think is really cool about it. Looking to the future, there's really going to be a new kind of generational shift in the talent, the people who are doing this. They're tech native. And so it's being able to talk in one side about the strategy and the why, and then being able to talk about the technological capabilities, why artificial intelligence should be used in this particular application, why this circumstance really needs a different type of algorithm. And those are the things where if you can start to blend those skills, the sky's the limit. I mean, there's really all sorts of opportunity, because that is just starting to become a real proposition for a career.
Awesome. So you're segueing so well. It's almost like we prepared for this, even though we really didn't. So I'm curious then on the technology side. So we've talked a lot. You've worked in supply chain for a lot of tech companies, and there is supply chain in there. You briefly kind of touched on this idea that there are a lot of these tech concepts that are impacting supply chain. And obviously you're working for a company now that is like a leader in the space of technology for supply chain management. So I guess I'm curious about what are some of those cool technology things that are out there that are related to supply chain? And then I guess kind of what is Kinaxis doing that has made you want to go and sort of like put your expertise into play for that?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, like most jobs, there's a lot of repeated work. There's a lot of mundane things. And so technology is finding ways to make the work more interesting because it's taking some of that repeatable mundane work and automating it. And that's not just from a robot packing a box. There's a process automation that's occurring. There's a number of different ways that those are coming into play. There's also new applications of the math. And anybody that goes into supply chain and operations looks at all of these formulas. And for so long, they just make an assumption and they stick with it. But when you start to see ships taking longer to arrive from China, or a vessel getting stuck in the Suez Canal, those types of things, you have to be able to change the information. And that artificial intelligence capabilities that are out there that can tell you right now that it's going to be late, and that here's the reasons why, and here's what the impact is to your orders. That's what we're seeing. And that's a lot of what Kinaxis does, is from the standpoint of trying to pull together all of these information sources so that anybody from an individual planner who is an entry-level individual can look at the supply chain and say, this order or this ship is going to be late coming from China, or we've had a delay on a railroad, or whatever it is, and they can start to then make a decision. And all the way up to the executive levels, all looking at the same information, making decisions, testing out scenarios. And really, as an executive, what they're looking for in the future, what right now even, is for individuals to make the decision, to take charge of that, and to really own not just identifying it as a problem, but solving the problem at the same time. And so that's what we do from the supply chain planning perspective, is really giving companies that chance to get everybody into the same system, looking at the data at the same time, and really trying to drive the decision. I mean, we talk about it in the context of the old way would be if you were trying to gather your friends to go to a movie or to go to dinner or any of those things we used to do pre-pandemic, and you could only text one person at a time. There's no such thing as a group chat, and that you had to wait for the response before you can go to the next person. It'd be really annoying and painful. Well, that's how supply chains have run in the past. Now there's group texts. Now there's these technology platforms that allow everybody to talk to each other and really make the decisions real time. And that's where it's going. And that's really where it's about, how do you know what's happening in China? How do you know what weather looks like? You know, it's unseasonably warm, so we're going to sell more water. All of these things our technology is helping us to know more, to know it more quickly, and to actually be responsive to it and make a decision and take some action.
That makes complete sense. And I'm realizing right now that I can't believe I didn't ask a question about the ship stuck in the Suez Canal and how difficult that made your life, or how much it made your life a little bit better because everybody wanted help with supply chain.
Well, the funniest part is, well, I guess this isn't very funny, but it's still there. So all of the news attention has come off because it's no longer stuck in the middle of that canal. But the country of Egypt is still actually detaining that ship because it caused such a disruption to the local economy. Egypt wants a fine in excess of €1 billion to actually let the ship go on to its destination. So it was sitting there in early March. We're here at the end of June, middle of June. So it's about 3 months. It's still there. That's the thing that is kind of fallen out of the limelight. But those are the disruptions that exist. And I would say whether it's a hurricane or the vessel, pandemics, these are the things that happen all the time, and they just ripple throughout supply chains. And that's when it's the big fundamental human behavioral changes that we've seen. People obviously jump on them, and it's a universal need. And that's what we've seen, as a lot of people have come to us and said, okay, help us to figure out what to do when all of this breaks, and help us to make the decisions about what works and what doesn't. And something like the Suez Canal, I mean, it made for a very interesting news story, but it's the follow-on effect. And then even more so, you look at there's a crane that collapsed in one of the Asian ports, and then many of the Asian ports are impacted by COVID again. And so there's no one thing. It's always changing. It's always disrupted. And it's exciting and it's exhausting at the same time.
Goodness, it's funny. Like you think about the carrier. I don't think anybody realized. So if you didn't realize this, like tune in to Q&A corner to get the most up to date supply chain news that the ship is still stuck there. But yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. These things happen all the time, and yet all of the we all still ate, right? Like despite the toilet paper shortages and all the rest of this stuff, there are people like yourself that are out there that are doing the work to keep that supply chain running, which I think is pretty incredible, all things considered, with everything that happens with all of those major human and non-human things. It's still happening. So that's huge. I think the power of supply chain, right?
Well, and it highlights the power of the human spirit too. I mean, the individuals who stocked the shelves every single night with toilet paper because people were hoarding, it took those people to physically put it on the shelf, and then an hour after the store opens, it's gone. And they knew that they were going to have to do that every single night until some of that panic resolved itself. And really, all of these adaptations that have gone along the way, you see that the movement to curbside pickup, for example. I mean, those are people that are figuring out how to make this stuff work on the fly, because that's what our expectation is. And we don't necessarily see it. We still get our food. We still have our electricity. We still have all of that. And we're fortunate in that respect. But there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of crazy things just to make it work.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? I think there's that final step that of all these systems, regardless of the technology, that is so fundamentally human. That is such an important consideration, which I think is so true. Okay, so jumping back, I've got two kind of questions left before we finish off. So the first one is maybe jumping back to an earlier one where I said, say like what are the places to get started in here, but what are the kind of top skills? And I know this is a broad question because supply chain is such an ever-changing and broad area. It's like going and saying to somebody that wants to get into just technology, like, what are the skills you need? But what are kind of some big top skills that you see as being beneficial for somebody who's going to be in a role where they're helping to make changes in supply chain within an organization?
I would say the thing that is underestimated is communication and change management. Ann Robinson, our chief strategy officer, talks constantly about that the thing that isn't taught very well is change management, and that in you're in an environment that constantly changes, how do you communicate what's happening? How do you come up with a plan to deal with it? How do you make sure that it's executed? So being able to do that at an early stage in your career sets you up to be successful in supply chain or anything else for that matter. The technical skills, the data analytics, being able to understand numbers, to be able to not just perform the analysis, but to say why it matters and to say what the impact is beyond that. That's where you start to combine that analytics with the communication as well, and being able to articulate what value you are helping, not because you're trying to do it to promote your own career necessarily, but what you can do about a given situation and the circumstances at hand. I would say definitely we're seeing the collision of data science and supply chain. In some cases, you have citizen developers that are out there writing their own code and developing their own apps to bolt on. I mean, we have an app platform ourselves where we have a number of partners who are out there trying to help with things like truck loading and recycling. And so there's really this chance to come up with new and different ways of using supply chain with the technologies that are coming out. So it's not enough just to say I did this thing or I know how to code, but it's about trying to connect it and articulate it to that strategy and to that supply chain understanding. And that's really something that comes with experience. And so there's a little bit of time that has to come with this. So as far as where to get into it, anywhere you can, really. I mean, it's not flashy and it's not always glamorous, but there's a lot that comes from seeing it firsthand. And I'm biased, but I think some of my most memorable moments in my career were lying on the floor under a conveyor belt trying to zip tie things together so the product can keep flowing, and just realizing that literally sometimes it's zip ties and duct tape, and understanding how fragile it can be, and then really saying, okay, now let's make it better because we've seen the impact of it when it doesn't work. So let's go find the problems, let's make it better, and actually do something about this. Now I can't hear you. I can hear you. Yep.
There we go. You can hear me now, yeah?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. The audio mixer I'm using decided that it wanted to stop working right near the end. So we got a couple minutes left, and I love one of our top viewers, Sixers fan, has just arrived with like kind of it's a start of the interview question, but it's gonna kind of be one of our last questions. And so the question in the chat is like, what was your dream kind of lifestyle and job when you were growing up and entering high school, and then what classes and extracurriculars did you take to try and get there?
Being an industrial engineer, I got to take a little bit of everything. And so I think the things that I actually found the most interesting were the ones that helped me to see a broader picture of the world. And yes, I took a class called Sports and Daily Life in Ancient Rome when I was at university. But it was really cool to look back and go, wait, the things that we are dealing with now have happened before in the course of the world. So it's not just that this little bubble that we see. Get out and see some different things and see the connections and realize that we have a lot that we can learn from along the way, and really be a continuous learner. From my standpoint, I've always loved this idea of connecting the dots, and really trying to do optimization, linear optimization, and some of the linear programming. I was never great at Visual Basic or R or Python or any of those things, but it was, how do I find the right pieces of information and use them to actually make a decision? And really, part of that was just trial and error. I mean, from my career, you can see that I've traversed a lot of different places,
Totally.
and I've picked up a lot of skills along the way. And I've been really fortunate just to learn at every step. I would say that's the fundamental piece, is that what are you going to do today to make yourself better tomorrow, and learn from everything. I know that sounds super cliche, but don't fixate. Go find some other things and then try and bring it back in and see if it makes sense, and give you some context and some things to bounce off each other and see what sticks.
I love that. So that'll lead us into our final question. And I know it's probably just going to be repeating exactly what you said, but this will give me the time to put it on camera so I can get centered on you, so I can get a brilliant clip for showcasing this amazing interview. So if you had one piece of advice for 18-year-old Patrick about kind of getting to be to the successful place that you're at now, what would kind of be that salient advice for getting this awesome career working so closely in the tech industry?
I would say the biggest thing is, one, be kind to yourself. There's a lot of pressure out there to be perfect and to never make mistakes. And I can tell you, every single place that I've ever worked, I've made some colossal mistakes, and it have been fantastic learning moments after the fact. But going into it, give yourself a chance to make some mistakes. Really don't be hard on yourself, and don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake, because those are really going to be some fantastic learning opportunities. And then from there, don't stop. This is a fundamental thing that I've learned, is that be bold, be assertive, keep trying to find those answers, and keep trying to make it make sense for you, because the way you think about it as an individual isn't necessarily the way that somebody else thinks about it, and that's not a bad thing. When you bring a different idea to the perspective, you can change the conversation, you can change your own mind. That's how innovation happens, is that we learn together. and don't be afraid to speak up on that, because you bring value, you bring a perspective that's your own, and you think about things in a way that somebody else might not, and that's valuable. So I know that's not a tech answer, that's not a hard skill kind of thing, but this is a difficult life that we live, and it's there's a lot of things that we try to piece together, and supply chain is super intense at times. And so we need to give ourselves a chance to be good, kind, compassionate human beings to each other, but to ourselves along the way, and give ourselves a chance to actually go do something cool.
I love that. And I just got to say, so we have so many guests that come on Q&A Corner. We've had now, I think, 30 different guests working in different areas of the technology industry. And every single one comes on and says kind of the exact same thing. I've got an answer that's not a tech skill, but this is like this super important thing, and like so salient, and so, I think, incredibly powerful. Being kind to yourself, like recognizing you're going to make mistakes. Don't stop. Like those are, it's stuff that I think as professionals we know because we've experienced it. But for those that are out there, like our Sixers fan who's asking questions about like what classes should I take, don't worry about all the classes. Like that'll work itself out. You can do things that you enjoy, but it's the kind of advice that Patrick is providing that is really the stuff that's gonna help you go incredibly far, either in the technology industry or in any industry that you want to end up in.
Yeah, and I would think that whatever classes you decide to take, have the story why you're doing it. Whatever things you'd like to go pursue, have the story of why you're doing it. Make it meaningful, and tell somebody why. When they ask you the question, give them an answer. I don't know is a viable answer to situations, but that's not a good enough excuse to stop. If you just say, I don't know and I don't care, that's fine. But be conscious of it, and actually, tell a good story along the way. I had a teaching assistant when I was in undergrad say, everything's either a good time or a good story, and if you're lucky, it's both. And so, in the college context, that had one frame of mind, but it's something I've taken with me, is that, tell a good story, have a good time doing it.
Amazing. Thank you. So like this has been, I can't tell you how much of a pleasure this has been, Patrick. Like the fact that we got to connect just even a month ago, and now to do this again now, like so spectacular to get a chance to learn more, kind of not only learn more about what supply chain is, but also like such incredibly valuable advice for our viewers that are out there that are considering a career in the technology industry, and maybe now are considering a career that's going to have a connection to supply chain.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be able to connect with you and your audience, and certainly anytime you'll have me back, I'll be there.
Amazing. So if you are just catching the stream and you're like, what's going on? I just showed up. I'm sorry. We're just finishing up. But if you would like to find Patrick, you are in luck. You can go to hightechu.ca, which is the website just down there. Go over to our event calendar. You can find the event about today, which will tell you a little bit more about Patrick. Also, we'll have a link to his LinkedIn profile. And if you are 14 and don't know what a LinkedIn profile is, that's totally okay. It's basically just a way for you to find Patrick and to reach out to him. Also, you can always reach out to us here at High Tech U, and we can make some of those connections if you're interested in getting in touch. This video, if you're catching it on Twitch, and you're like, where can I find this afterwards? It's going to live in a VOD here on Twitch as well. We're going to be uploading it over onto our YouTube after I've done some creative magic to fix all of the many mistakes that I made throughout the start of this stream. So that'll make everybody's lives a little bit easier in terms of their viewing pleasure. And of course, stay tuned, because we are always trying to find folks just like Patrick that have some great advice for you. So please stay tuned to what's going on around the High Tech U community. Go to hightechu.ca. You can subscribe to the calendar. You can just wait for random notifications via email or on Twitch, or you can just follow us on any of our many social networks, and you can find out about events that are going on. So, but to end things off, huge thank you to all of you, our viewers who are out there. Massive, massive thank you to you, Patrick, for being here. It's an absolute just pleasure to get the chance to chat with you live on stream and get to know you and what you're doing a little bit better. And I'm so excited for doing some more stuff and hopefully having you back here on Q&A Corner in the future.
I would love that. And again, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, and I do look forward to the next time, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who wants to connect. I always respond, so feel free to reach out.
Amazing. All right. Well, everyone who's out there, as always, be calm, be kind, be safe. We're almost through this. We've almost done it. We will be thinking of all of you, and we will see you next time here on Q&A Corner presented by High Tech U. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Be well.